In the world of elite military operations where split-second decisions mean the difference between life and death, one woman shattered every assumption about what a warrior looks like. They called her too small for combat, too emotional for the pressure, and too weak for the elite ranks of the Navy SEALs. But when enemy forces surrounded her team in the mountains of Afghanistan, Sarah Chen became the deadliest force on the battlefield. In just 5 minutes, she would prove that underestimation is the most dangerous weapon an enemy can wield against a true warrior. This is the true story of how prejudice, determination, and extraordinary skill collided in the heat of battle, changing military history forever. Sarah Chen stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighing just 125 pounds soaking wet. To most people looking at her, she appeared more like a college student heading to her next engineering class than someone who could handle the most demanding military training in the world. Her quiet demeanor and soft-spoken nature only reinforced the misconceptions that followed her everywhere she went in the military. But beneath that unassuming exterior beat the heart of a warrior who had been fighting against expectations her entire life. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, Sarah had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates were interested in fashion magazines and boy bands, she spent her afternoons at the local shooting range with her grandfather, a decorated World War II veteran who taught her that precision and patience were the most valuable weapons any soldier could possess. Her grandfather, Chen Wei, had immigrated to America after serving as a sniper in the Chinese resistance against Japanese occupation. He saw something special in his granddaughter that others missed completely. The shooting range became Sarah's second home. Every day after school, she would meet her grandfather there, learning not just how to shoot, but how to think like a marksman. Chen Wei taught her that being a sniper was not about having the biggest muscles or the loudest voice. It was about having the sharpest mind and the steadiest hands. He would make her practice breathing exercises for hours, teaching her to control her heartbeat and find the space between breaths where perfect shots lived. Most importantly, he taught her that being underestimated was not a weakness but a tactical advantage. When Sarah graduated high school at 17, she shocked everyone by announcing her intention to join the Navy. Her parents had expected her to pursue engineering at a prestigious university, given her exceptional grades in mathematics and science. Her classmates could not imagine quiet Sarah Chen in military uniform. Even her guidance counselor tried to discourage her, suggesting that military service might be too challenging for someone of her small stature and gentle personality. But Sarah had made up her mind. She wanted to serve her country, and more importantly, she wanted to test herself against the higher standards the military had to offer. Basic training was the first real test of Sarah's determination. The drill instructors immediately sized her up as someone who would not last a week. They pushed her harder than the male recruits, expecting her to break under the pressure. During the first week, several instructors made comments about how the Navy had lowered its standards by allowing women into combat roles. They assigned her the heaviest packs during marches, the most difficult obstacle courses, and the longest guard duties. What they did not know was that Sarah thrived under pressure. Every challenge they threw at her only made her more determined to prove them wrong. The physical training was brutal, but Sarah had prepared for this her entire life without realizing it. Years of helping her grandfather maintain his small farm had given her surprising strength in her compact frame. Her background in competitive swimming had built her cardiovascular endurance. Most importantly, her grandfather's mental conditioning had taught her to push through pain and discomfort that would break other recruits. While larger recruits struggled with the precision tasks, Sarah excelled. Her small hands were perfect for detailed weapons maintenance. Her sharp eyesight and steady nerves made her a natural on the shooting range. It was during marksmanship training that Sarah first began to gain real respect from her instructors. On the rifle range, she consistently outshot recruits who had grown up hunting and had years more experience with firearms. Her groupings were so tight that the rangemasters initially thought there was something wrong with their equipment. When they realized that this small woman was genuinely shooting with exceptional accuracy, word began to spread throughout the training command. Sarah Chen was not just another recruit struggling to keep up. She was something special. The transformation in how others treated her was gradual but noticeable. Drill instructors who had been dismissive began paying closer attention to her performance. Fellow recruits who had initially ignored her started seeking her advice on shooting techniques. Sarah handled the attention with the same quiet confidence she had shown throughout training. She helped others improve their marksmanship without making them feel inferior. She shared techniques her grandfather had taught her, always giving credit where it was due. This combination of exceptional skill and humble leadership began to set her apart from other recruits. After completing basic training at the top of her class, Sarah faced another crucial decision. The Navy offered her several career paths, including intelligence and communications roles that would keep her far from combat zones. Her superior officers, while impressed with her abilities, still harbored doubts about placing such a small woman in direct combat roles. They encouraged her to consider positions that would utilize her obvious intelligence and technical skills while keeping her in safer environments. But Sarah had not joined the Navy to play it safe. She wanted to push herself to the absolute limit of her capabilities. When the opportunity arose to attempt special warfare training, Sarah knew this was her moment. The special warfare community was the most elite branch of the Navy, home to the legendary SEALs. It was also the most male-dominated and traditional part of the military. Women had only recently been allowed to attempt these programs, and very few had succeeded. The training was designed to break the strongest men both physically and mentally. Many people, including some who cared about Sarah, tried to discourage her from attempting something so extreme. Her parents flew out to meet with her before she began special warfare selection. They worried that she was pushing herself too hard, trying to prove something that did not need proving. Her father, a successful businessman, offered to use his connections to help her secure a comfortable position in military intelligence. Her mother worried about the physical dangers of special operations training. They both struggled to understand why their brilliant daughter was choosing such a difficult path when she had so many other options available to her. Sarah listened respectfully to her parents' concerns, but her mind was already made up. She explained to them that she had spent her entire life being told what she could not do, what was too difficult for her, what was not appropriate for someone like her. The military had given her a chance to test herself against objective standards, and she was not going to waste that opportunity. She reminded them of the lessons her grandfather had taught her about pushing beyond what others thought possible. Most importantly, she told them that she would rather fail attempting something extraordinary than succeed at something ordinary. The conversation with her parents was difficult, but it also crystallized Sarah's motivation. She was not trying to prove something to the world. She was trying to discover the full extent of her own capabilities. The military had shown her that she was capable of far more than anyone had imagined, including herself. Special warfare training would be the ultimate test of whether her grandfather's lessons and her own determination could overcome the physical limitations that everyone else saw as insurmountable obstacles. As Sarah prepared to begin the most challenging phase of her military career, she carried with her all the lessons her grandfather had taught her. She remembered his stories about facing impossible odds during the war, about surviving when larger and stronger men had fallen. He had taught her that warfare was not just about physical strength. It was about mental toughness, tactical intelligence, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. These were areas where Sarah's natural abilities could compete with anyone, regardless of size or gender. The night before special warfare training began, Sarah stood alone on the base, looking up at the stars and thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. From a small town in Oregon to the threshold of the most elite military training in the world, she had consistently exceeded everyone's expectations except her own. Tomorrow would begin the next chapter of that journey, one that would test every lesson she had learned and every ounce of determination she possessed. She was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the knowledge that being underestimated had always been her greatest advantage. Special warfare training began before dawn, with a physical fitness test that eliminated half the candidates on the first day. Sarah found herself surrounded by men who towered over her, many of whom had played college football or had been elite athletes in civilian life. The instructors made it clear from the first moment that they expected very few candidates to complete the program, and they seemed particularly skeptical about the handful of women who had been allowed to attempt the training. The atmosphere was thick with doubt about whether women belonged in special operations at all. The first week consisted of grueling physical challenges designed to test the absolute limits of human endurance. Candidates were required to carry heavy boats over their heads for miles across soft sand. They had to complete obstacle courses while carrying wounded teammates. The swimming requirements were so demanding that even experienced athletes struggled to meet the time standards. Sarah watched as candidates who had appeared far more physically capable than her dropped out one by one, unable to handle the relentless pace and constant pressure from the instructors. What Sarah lacked in raw physical power, she made up for with superior technique and mental toughness. During boat carries, while other candidates relied on brute strength, she focused on efficient movement and proper body mechanics that her grandfather had taught her during their farm work. When swimming in rough ocean conditions, her smaller size actually became an advantage, allowing her to slice through the water more efficiently than larger candidates who fought against the waves. Most importantly, while other candidates became frustrated and angry when instructors screamed criticism at them, Sarah remained calm and focused on the task at hand. The instructors began to notice that this small woman was not just surviving their attempts to break her, she was thriving under pressure. During one particularly brutal exercise where candidates had to carry telephone poles while running through surf, Sarah's team was struggling because they could not coordinate their movements effectively. Without being asked, Sarah began calling out a rhythm that allowed her team to move together efficiently. Her natural leadership abilities were emerging under stress, something that surprised even the most experienced instructors who had initially written her off. As the weeks progressed, the training became increasingly specialized and technical. This was where Sarah's intellectual abilities and attention to detail began to set her apart from other candidates. During weapons training, she absorbed technical information faster than anyone else in her class. Her marksmanship skills, already exceptional, continued to improve as she learned to use specialized equipment and advanced techniques. When the class moved on to explosives and demolition training, Sarah's background in mathematics and engineering made complex calculations seem simple to her. The sniper training phase was where Sarah truly began to distinguish herself. The program required candidates to make precise shots at extreme distances under various environmental conditions. They had to account for wind speed, humidity, temperature, and dozens of other variables that could affect bullet trajectory. Many candidates who had been excellent shooters at normal distances struggled with the advanced mathematics and environmental awareness required for long-range precision shooting. Sarah, however, seemed to have an intuitive understanding of these complex factors. Her instructors noticed that Sarah approached sniper training differently than other candidates. While most students focused on memorizing formulas and procedures, Sarah worked to understand the underlying principles that governed long-range shooting. She spent extra hours studying weather patterns and ballistics, not because she was struggling to keep up, but because she wanted to master every aspect of the discipline. Her grandfather's lessons about patience and precision were proving invaluable as she learned to wait for perfect shooting conditions and make shots that other candidates could not even attempt. During one training exercise, candidates were required to make a shot at over 800 yards in challenging wind conditions. Most of the class failed to even hit the target, and those who did manage hits were several inches off center. Sarah studied the wind patterns for nearly 10 minutes before taking her shot. When she fired, the bullet struck within an inch of the target's center, a shot so precise that the instructors initially thought it was luck. When she repeated similar accuracy on subsequent attempts, they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Word of Sarah's exceptional shooting abilities began to spread beyond her training class. Senior instructors and visiting officers started coming to the range to observe her performance. Some were skeptical, expecting to see an average shooter who had gotten lucky a few times. Instead, they witnessed shooting that was consistently at a professional level that typically took years of specialized training to achieve. Sarah's combination of natural ability, technical knowledge, and mental composure was producing results that impressed even the most experienced snipers in the military. The psychological pressure of being constantly observed and evaluated would have broken many candidates, but Sarah seemed to thrive on the attention. She understood that she was representing not just herself, but all the women who might follow in her footsteps. This responsibility motivated her to push herself even harder, to prove that gender was irrelevant when it came to the skills that really mattered in special operations. Every perfect shot was a statement about what was possible when talent and determination met opportunity. As the training program entered its final phases, the challenges became more realistic and complex. Candidates were placed in simulated combat scenarios where they had to make life or death decisions under extreme stress. They were required to operate with minimal sleep, limited food, and constant pressure from instructors who were trying to simulate the chaos and confusion of real combat situations. Many candidates who had performed well in controlled training environments struggled when faced with the unpredictability of these realistic scenarios. Sarah's performance in these complex exercises revealed another dimension of her capabilities. Her ability to remain calm under pressure allowed her to think clearly when other candidates were making mistakes due to stress and fatigue. Her attention to detail meant that she noticed threats and opportunities that others missed. Most importantly, her growing confidence in her shooting abilities allowed her to make shots in challenging conditions that other candidates would not even attempt. She was developing into exactly the kind of operator that special warfare units needed most. The final examination was a comprehensive test that combined all the skills candidates had learned throughout the program. They were required to infiltrate a target area, gather intelligence, and eliminate specific threats while avoiding detection by opposing forces. The exercise lasted for 3 days and tested every physical, mental, and technical skill the program had taught. Candidates who had survived months of training still failed this final test. proving that completion of the program required not just individual skills, but the ability to integrate those skills under realistic combat conditions. Sarah approached the final exercise with the same methodical preparation that had characterized her entire training experience. She studied the terrain carefully, planned multiple routes to her objectives, and prepared for various contingencies that might arise during the mission. When the exercise began, she moved through the course with confidence and precision that impressed even the instructors who had been observing her progress for months. Her shooting was flawless, her tactical decisions were sound, and her overall performance was at a level that exceeded many candidates who had initially appeared far more capable than her. When the final scores were announced, Sarah had not only completed the program successfully, but had finished at the top of her class in several critical categories. Her marksmanship scores were the highest recorded in the program's recent history. Her tactical knowledge was comprehensive, and her leadership abilities had been consistently demonstrated throughout the training. The instructors who had initially doubted whether any woman could complete the program were now recommending Sarah for the most challenging assignments available to new special operations personnel. The graduation ceremony was a moment of vindication for Sarah, and a wake-up call for the military establishment. She had proven that the standards and requirements of special warfare training were about capability, not gender. Her success opened doors for other women who had been discouraged from attempting such challenging programs. More importantly, it demonstrated that the military's most elite units could benefit from expanding their recruiting beyond traditional demographics to find the best talent available. As Sarah received her graduation certificate and the insignia that marked her as a qualified special warfare operator, she thought about her grandfather and the lessons he had taught her about perseverance and proving doubters wrong. She had transformed from an underestimated recruit into one of the most promising snipers in the military. Her journey was far from over, but she had already accomplished something that would inspire others and change perceptions about what was possible in military service. The next phase of her career would test whether her exceptional training performance would translate to success in real combat operations. Sarah's first assignment as a qualified special warfare operator took her to a forward operating base in the mountains of Afghanistan, where American forces were conducting operations against entrenched enemy positions. The base was a stark, dusty outpost surrounded by towering peaks that provided perfect vantage points for enemy snipers and observers. The terrain was some of the most challenging in the world for military operations, with extreme weather conditions and limited visibility that made every mission a test of survival skills as well as tactical abilities. When Sarah arrived at the base, she was assigned to Alpha Team, a 6-person special operations unit that specialized in reconnaissance and precision strikes against high-value targets. The team leader, Sergeant Major Rodriguez, was a 15-year veteran who had served multiple deployments in both Iraq and Afghanistan. He had specifically requested Sarah for his team based on her exceptional training scores, but he was also curious to see how her performance would hold up under actual combat conditions where lives depended on her accuracy and decision-making abilities. The other members of Alpha Team greeted Sarah with a mixture of professional courtesy and barely concealed skepticism. They had heard about her training performance, but they had also seen plenty of operators who excelled in controlled environments but struggled when faced with the chaos and unpredictability of real combat. Staff Sergeant Jackson, the team's communications specialist, made it clear that he thought including women in special operations teams was a mistake that would eventually get people killed. Corporal Martinez, the team's medic, was more diplomatic, but equally doubtful about how Sarah would perform when the shooting started. Sarah understood that she would have to prove herself all over again with this new team. Training scores and graduation certificates meant nothing in the field, where reputation was earned through performance under fire. She approached this challenge with the same patient determination that had carried her through every previous obstacle. She focused on learning everything she could about the local terrain, enemy tactics, and the specific mission requirements that Alpha Team was expected to handle. The first few weeks at the forward operating base were relatively quiet, with Alpha Team conducting routine patrols and reconnaissance missions that allowed Sarah to familiarize herself with the operational environment. She spent hours studying satellite imagery and intelligence reports, learning to identify enemy positions and movement patterns. She practiced shooting at the base's range every day, adjusting her techniques for the high altitude and extreme temperature variations that affected bullet trajectories in the mountain environment. During her off-duty hours, Sarah worked to build relationships with her teammates. She helped Jackson maintain the team's sophisticated communications equipment, using her technical background to troubleshoot problems that had been plaguing the unit. She assisted Martinez with medical training exercises, drawing on her knowledge of anatomy and physiology to help other team members improve their first aid skills. Gradually, her teammates began to see her as a valuable contributor rather than just a liability they had to protect. The first real test of Sarah's combat abilities came during a night reconnaissance mission to observe enemy activity in a valley suspected of harboring a high-value target. Alpha Team was inserted by helicopter several miles from their observation point and had to navigate difficult terrain in complete darkness to reach their position undetected. Sarah carried her full share of equipment, including specialized optical gear and her customized sniper rifle, a weapon system that had been specifically configured to take advantage of her exceptional marksmanship abilities. The team established an observation post on a ridge overlooking the target valley and began a 48-hour surveillance mission. Sarah was responsible for providing Overwatch security, while other team members gathered intelligence on enemy movements and activities. Her position required her to remain motionless for hours at a time, scanning the surrounding terrain for threats while maintaining communication with the rest of the team through hand signals and whispered radio transmissions. On the second night of the surveillance mission, Sarah detected movement on a distant ridgeline that other team members had not noticed. Through her scope, she could see 3 enemy fighters moving into positions that would allow them to observe the American team's location. The enemy fighters were over 600 yards away, positioned among rocks and vegetation that provided excellent camouflage. Sarah realized that if the enemy team was allowed to continue their observation, they would eventually detect Alpha Team's position and call for reinforcements. Sarah faced her first critical decision in combat. She could alert her team leader and recommend that they abort the mission to avoid detection. This would be the safe choice, but it would also mean that valuable intelligence about the high-value target would be lost.
Alternatively, she could attempt to neutralize the enemy observers, but this would require making precision shots at extreme range in low-light conditions, while ensuring that she did not alert other enemy forces in the area to their presence.
Rodriguez trusted Sarah's judgment and gave her permission to engage the enemy observers if she was confident she could eliminate them without compromising the mission.
Sarah spent several minutes studying the wind conditions and calculating the adjustments needed for the extreme range shots. The enemy fighters were positioned so that she would have to make 3 quick consecutive shots before any of them could react and escape or call for help. The pressure was enormous, but Sarah felt calm and focused as she prepared to take her first shots in combat. The first shot struck the lead enemy fighter center mass, dropping him instantly. Sarah immediately adjusted her aim and fired again, hitting the second fighter before he could react to his companion's death. The third enemy fighter began to move as he realized his position was compromised, but Sarah's third shot caught him as he attempted to find cover. All 3 shots had been fired within 15 seconds, and all 3 had been fatal hits at ranges that would challenge even the most experienced snipers. Rodriguez and the rest of Alpha Team were stunned by what they had witnessed. Sarah had just demonstrated shooting skills under combat conditions that exceeded anything they had seen from other snipers. More importantly, she had made critical tactical decisions under pressure that had allowed the mission to continue successfully. The enemy fighters had been eliminated so quietly and efficiently that other enemy forces in the area remained unaware that anything had happened. The surveillance mission continued for another day, with Alpha Team gathering crucial intelligence about enemy movements and fortifications in the target valley. Sarah's actions had not only protected her team, but had also ensured that the mission could be completed successfully. When they were extracted from their position, they carried with them information that would be used to plan a major operation against the high-value target they had been observing. Back at the base, word of Sarah's performance spread quickly through the special operations community. 3 confirmed kills at extreme range during her first combat mission was the kind of performance that established reputations and earned respect from even the most skeptical operators. Jackson, who had been openly doubtful about having a woman on the team, was now telling anyone who would listen that Sarah was the best sniper he had ever worked with. Martinez began referring to her as his guardian angel after she had eliminated threats that could have gotten the entire team killed. Rodriguez submitted a detailed report recommending Sarah for commendation and requesting that she be retained with Alpha Team for future operations. He noted that her performance had exceeded all expectations and that she had demonstrated the kind of tactical judgment and technical skills that were essential for success in special operations. The report also mentioned that Sarah's presence had actually improved the team's overall effectiveness by providing capabilities that had not been available to them previously. Sarah's confidence grew with each successful mission, but she remained focused on continuous improvement rather than becoming complacent about her early successes. She spent hours analyzing each engagement, looking for ways to improve her techniques and decision-making processes. She studied after-action reports from other sniper teams, learning from their experiences and adapting their lessons to her own operational methods. Her grandfather's lessons about patience and humility continued to guide her as she gained experience in one of the most demanding environments in modern warfare. The reputation Sarah was building through her performance with Alpha Team began to attract attention from higher command levels. Senior officers who had initially been skeptical about women in special operations roles were now requesting detailed briefings about her capabilities and performance. Some began to wonder whether the military had been overlooking a significant source of talent by discouraging women from pursuing these challenging specialties. As Alpha Team prepared for their next major operation, Sarah had become an integral part of their tactical planning process. Her input on target analysis and engagement strategies was valued as highly as that of much more experienced team members. She had proven that her exceptional training performance was not just the result of artificial test conditions, but reflected genuine capabilities that translated directly to combat effectiveness. The stage was being set for an operation that would test those capabilities under the most demanding conditions possible. 3 months into her deployment, Sarah received orders for Alpha Team's most dangerous mission yet. Intelligence had located a high-value terrorist leader who was coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. The target was hiding in a fortified compound in a remote mountain valley, protected by an estimated 20 to 30 heavily armed fighters who had been carefully positioned to defend against any assault. The compound was situated in terrain that made conventional attacks extremely difficult, with natural choke points that could be easily defended by determined enemies. The mission briefing revealed the complexity of the operation Alpha Team would be attempting. The target compound was built into the side of a mountain, with multiple levels and defensive positions that provided overlapping fields of fire. Enemy fighters had spent months preparing defensive positions, including sniper nests, machine gun emplacements, and improvised explosive devices that could be triggered if the compound was attacked. Previous surveillance had identified at least 4 enemy snipers positioned around the compound, each with clear views of the most likely approach routes. Rodriguez explained that Alpha Team would be responsible for eliminating the external defenses, while a larger assault force moved in to capture or kill the primary target. Sarah's specific assignment was to neutralize the enemy snipers who could engage the assault force during their approach. This was a critical mission requirement because the enemy snipers were positioned to cover the only feasible routes that the assault team could use to reach the compound. If even one enemy sniper remained active during the assault, American casualties would be almost inevitable. The tactical challenge facing Sarah was enormous. The 4 enemy sniper positions were located at different elevations and ranges, some over 1,000 yards from her planned shooting position. She would have to engage targets that were themselves skilled marksmen, operating from prepared positions with excellent cover and concealment. Most challenging of all, she would have to neutralize all 4 enemy snipers quickly enough to prevent any of them from engaging the incoming assault force or alerting additional defenders. Sarah spent 3 days studying satellite imagery and reconnaissance reports, memorizing every detail of the target area. She identified a rocky outcrop that would provide her with clear lines of sight to all 4 enemy positions, while offering reasonable cover and concealment for her own location. The position was over 1,500 yards from the compound, at the extreme range of her weapon system, but it was the only location that provided the necessary tactical advantages for the mission to succeed. The approach to Sarah's shooting position required Alpha Team to move through 10 miles of difficult mountain terrain during darkness, carrying specialized equipment and enough ammunition for an extended engagement. The team would have to avoid enemy patrols and observation posts while navigating terrain that included steep cliffs, loose rock slides, and areas where even small mistakes could result in fatal falls. The physical demands of the approach march would test every member of the team before the actual combat operations even began. Alpha Team began their movement at midnight, using night vision equipment to navigate the treacherous mountain paths. Sarah carried her sniper rifle system, which weighed over 20 pounds, along with her full combat load of ammunition, communications gear, and survival equipment. The total weight of her equipment exceeded 60 pounds, a significant burden for someone of her small stature, but she had trained extensively for exactly these conditions and was determined not to slow down her teammates. The movement to the target area took 8 hours of careful navigation through some of the most difficult terrain any of the team members had ever encountered. They had to cross 3 separate ridgelines, each requiring them to climb nearly vertical rock faces while carrying their full equipment loads. Sarah's small size actually became an advantage during these climbs, as she could fit through gaps in the rocks that larger team members had to navigate around. Her exceptional physical conditioning, developed through months of specialized training, allowed her to maintain the team's pace despite carrying proportionally more weight than her teammates. As Alpha Team approached their final positions, they began to separate according to the mission plan. Rodriguez and Jackson would establish a command and observation post where they could coordinate with the incoming assault force and provide backup support if needed, Martinez would position himself where he could provide medical support and serve as a backup shooter if Sarah encountered problems. Sarah would move to her designated sniper position alone, where she would have the best fields of fire, but would also be the most isolated and vulnerable member of the team. Sarah reached her shooting position just as the first light of dawn began to illuminate the target valley. The location she had selected provided excellent visibility of all 4 enemy sniper positions, but it also left her exposed to detection if enemy forces conducted thorough surveillance of the surrounding terrain. She used natural vegetation and rock formations to construct a concealed hide that would make her virtually invisible to observation while still allowing her to engage all her targets effectively. The enemy compound below looked exactly as the intelligence reports had described it, but seeing it in person revealed additional defensive preparations that had not been apparent in satellite imagery. Sarah could identify fortified positions, camouflaged fighting holes, and what appeared to be improvised explosive devices positioned to channel attackers into killing zones. The enemy fighters had clearly spent considerable time and effort preparing for exactly the kind of assault that was about to begin. Through her scope, Sarah began to identify and range the 4 enemy sniper positions she had been assigned to neutralize. The first target was positioned in a stone tower at the closest range, approximately 800 yards from her location. The second target was in a camouflage position among rocks at about 900 yards. The third target was in what appeared to be a cave entrance at over 1100 yards, while the fourth target was positioned on a ridge at the maximum range of nearly 1300 yards. Sarah spent 2 hours conducting detailed surveillance of each target position, noting the movement patterns of the enemy snipers and identifying the best opportunities for engagement. She calculated firing solutions for each target, taking into account the changing wind conditions, temperature variations, and the different elevations of each position. The mathematical calculations required for such precise long-range shooting were complex, but Sarah had trained extensively for exactly these scenarios. The assault force was scheduled to begin their movement at precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, which meant Sarah would have to begin engaging her targets at exactly that time to ensure the enemy snipers could not interfere with the approaching American forces. She had approximately 5 minutes to neutralize all 4 targets before the assault force would be exposed to enemy fire. This timeline meant she would have to make 4 extremely difficult shots in rapid succession, with no margin for error or missed opportunities. As the appointed time approached, Sarah conducted her final preparations. She verified her range calculations, checked her equipment one last time, and controlled her breathing to achieve the calm, focused mental state that was essential for precision shooting. She had trained for thousands of hours to reach this moment, and now all of that preparation would be tested under the most demanding conditions possible. At exactly 10 o'clock, Sarah acquired her first target in her scope. The enemy sniper was positioned behind a stone wall, with only his head and shoulders visible through a small opening. At 800 yards, this was a challenging but achievable shot for someone of Sarah's abilities. She controlled her breathing, found the natural pause between heartbeats, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth, consistent pressure that had become second nature through endless hours of practice. The first shot was a perfect hit, striking the enemy sniper in the center of his forehead and eliminating him instantly. Sarah immediately shifted to her second target, a fighter positioned among rocks at 900 yards. This target was more difficult because the enemy sniper was partially concealed and the range was greater, but Sarah had prepared for these exact conditions. Her second shot struck the target's center mass, dropping him before he could even react to the sound of the first shot. The third target presented the most challenging shot of the sequence. The enemy sniper was positioned in a cave entrance over 1100 yards away, with only a small portion of his body visible in the shadows. Sarah had to account for the reduced light conditions in addition to the extreme range, but her training had prepared her for exactly these difficult circumstances. Her third shot penetrated the shadows and found its target, eliminating the third enemy sniper with the same precision as the previous 2. The fourth and final target was at the absolute maximum range of Sarah's weapon system, positioned on a distant ridge nearly 1,300 yards away. At this range, even small errors in calculation or technique would result in a complete miss. The wind conditions were variable. The target was partially concealed, and Sarah was beginning to feel the pressure of time as the assault force approached their most vulnerable phase of the operation. This shot would require everything she had learned about precision marksmanship and mental control under pressure. Sarah took extra time to ensure her calculations were perfect, accounting for the extreme range wind conditions and the slight angle of the target position. She controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and made the final adjustments to her scope. When she fired, the shot felt perfect from the moment it left the barrel. Nearly 3 seconds later, she saw through her scope that the fourth enemy sniper had been eliminated just as cleanly as the previous 3 targets. In just over 4 minutes, Sarah had accomplished what many military experts would have considered impossible. She had made 4 consecutive hits at extreme range under combat conditions, eliminating threats that could have caused significant casualties among the assault force. As she watched through her scope, the American assault team moved into the compound without encountering any resistance from the sniper positions that had been neutralized. The mission was proceeding exactly according to plan, and Sarah's exceptional shooting had been the key factor in its initial success. The assault on the compound had been proceeding smoothly for 20 minutes when everything suddenly went wrong. The main assault force had successfully breached the outer defenses and was moving systematically through the compound's multiple levels when they triggered a carefully planned ambush. Hidden enemy fighters emerged from concealed positions throughout the complex, opening fire with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades that turned the tactical situation into chaos within seconds. From her observation position over a mile away, Sarah watched through her scope as American forces found themselves trapped in a deadly crossfire. The compound's defenders had allowed the assault team to penetrate deep into their territory before revealing their true strength. Intelligence estimates had seriously underestimated the number of enemy fighters present, and now at least 40 heavily armed defenders were engaging the assault force from multiple directions simultaneously. Rodriguez's voice crackled through Sarah's radio headset with urgency that she had never heard from the veteran team leader before. The assault force was requesting immediate fire support to suppress enemy positions that were inflicting heavy casualties on American forces. The enemy fighters were using the compound's complex layout to move between positions while maintaining continuous fire on the trapped assault team. Several Americans had already been wounded, and the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah immediately began scanning the compound through her scope, identifying enemy positions and looking for opportunities to provide effective fire support. The challenge was enormous because the enemy fighters were positioned among the same buildings where American forces were operating. She had to make precise shots that would eliminate enemy threats without risking friendly fire casualties, all while engaging targets at extreme range under rapidly changing tactical conditions. The first priority was an enemy machine gun position that had the assault force pinned down in an exposed courtyard. The machine gunner was firing from a second-story window, raking the courtyard with deadly accurate fire that prevented American forces from moving to cover or evacuating wounded personnel.
Sarah could see the muzzle flashes from the enemy weapon, but the shooter himself was largely concealed behind the window frame, presenting an extremely small target at over 1,200 yards.
Sarah calculated the firing solution quickly, accounting for the angle of the shot and the partial concealment of the target. When she fired, the bullet shattered the window frame and struck the machine gunner, silencing the weapon that had been causing the most immediate threat to American forces. The assault team immediately took advantage of the suppression to move wounded personnel to safer positions and reorganize their tactical formation. Before Sarah could congratulate herself on the successful shot, Rodriguez's voice was back on the radio with another urgent request. Enemy fighters with rocket-propelled grenades were maneuvering to positions where they could fire into the courtyard, where most of the assault force was now concentrated. If those enemy fighters reached their intended positions, the concentrated American forces would be vulnerable to devastating area effect weapons that could cause multiple casualties with each shot. Sarah identified 3 enemy fighters moving through the compound's upper levels, carrying the distinctive silhouettes of rocket-propelled grenade launchers. They were using interior corridors and stairwells to avoid exposure while moving toward positions that would give them clear shots at the American forces below. Sarah would have to engage these moving targets through windows and doorways, making shots that required split-second timing to catch the enemies during their brief moments of exposure. The first enemy fighter appeared in a third-story window for just a few seconds as he moved between rooms. Sarah's shot caught him in the center of his chest, dropping him and his weapon to the floor below. The second fighter was more cautious, pausing to observe the courtyard before moving to his firing position. This brief pause gave Sarah the opportunity she needed to make a precise shot through a narrow window opening, eliminating the second threat before he could bring his weapon to bear on American forces. The third enemy fighter had witnessed the fate of his companions and was now moving more carefully, using interior routes that kept him concealed from external observation. Sarah had to anticipate his movement pattern and position herself to engage him when he eventually reached his intended firing position. When he finally appeared at a window with his rocket launcher ready to fire, Sarah's shot struck him, just as he was aiming at the trapped American forces below. Rodriguez reported that the immediate threats from rocket-propelled grenades had been eliminated, but the tactical situation remained dangerous. Enemy fighters were continuing to engage American forces from multiple positions throughout the compound, and ammunition was running low among the assault team. The original plan had called for a quick strike followed by immediate extraction, but the unexpected enemy strength meant that the assault force needed sustained fire support to fight their way out of the compound. Sarah continued to scan for targets, identifying enemy fighters who were attempting to flank American positions or set up new firing positions. Each shot required careful calculation and precise execution because the ranges were extreme and the targets were often partially concealed or moving between covered positions. She was operating at the absolute limits of her weapon system's capabilities, making shots that would challenge even the most experienced snipers under ideal conditions. Over the next 3 minutes, Sarah engaged 8 more enemy targets with devastating effectiveness. She eliminated a sniper who had wounded 2 American soldiers from a concealed position in a water tower. She neutralized 2 enemy fighters who were attempting to place improvised explosive devices in the assault team's planned withdrawal route. She engaged multiple targets who were trying to establish new firing positions that would have allowed them to enfilade American defensive positions. Each successful shot not only eliminated an immediate threat but also had a psychological impact on the remaining enemy fighters. They realized that an incredibly accurate sniper was supporting the American forces, able to strike them even when they thought they were safely concealed. Some enemy fighters began to abandon their positions rather than risk exposure to what seemed like an invisible and unstoppable threat. This psychological pressure was almost as valuable as the physical elimination of specific targets. The turning point in the battle came when Sarah identified the enemy commander who was coordinating the defense from a position in the compound's central tower. The commander was using radio communications to direct other fighters and coordinate their attacks on American positions. Eliminating him would disrupt enemy coordination and potentially cause their organized resistance to collapse into individual fighters acting independently. The shot on the enemy commander was one of the most challenging Sarah had ever attempted. The target was at maximum range, partially concealed behind defensive barriers, and moving between observation points as he directed the battle. Sarah had to predict his movement pattern and time her shot to coincide with one of his brief exposures. When she finally took the shot, it was a perfect hit that instantly eliminated the enemy's tactical leadership. The impact of losing their commander was immediately apparent among the enemy fighters. Their coordinated attacks became sporadic and disorganized. Several fighters began withdrawing from their positions rather than continuing to engage the assault force. Others stopped maneuvering and remained in static positions that made them easier targets for the American forces. The tactical initiative began to shift in favor of the assault team for the first time since the ambush had been triggered. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with a tone of amazement that reflected what everyone who had witnessed Sarah's performance was feeling. In just over 5 minutes, she had made 12 precision shots at extreme range, eliminating threats that had been poised to inflict significant casualties on American forces. Her shooting had been so accurate and devastating that it had single-handedly changed the outcome of a battle that had initially appeared to favor the enemy defenders. The assault force was now able to complete their primary mission, capturing valuable intelligence and confirming the elimination of the high-value target they had originally come to find. More importantly, they were able to withdraw from the compound without the heavy casualties that had seemed inevitable just minutes earlier. Sarah's exceptional marksmanship had saved American lives and turned a potential disaster into a successful mission. As Alpha Team prepared to extract from their observation position, Rodriguez submitted an initial report that described Sarah's performance in terms that seemed almost unbelievable. 12 confirmed kills in 5 minutes at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, all while engaging targets that were actively participating in combat operations against American forces. The level of marksmanship Sarah had demonstrated was unprecedented in the experience of everyone who had witnessed it. Word of Sarah's extraordinary performance spread throughout the military community within hours of the mission's completion. Senior commanders who had initially been skeptical about women in combat roles were now requesting detailed briefings about how Sarah had been trained and whether her capabilities could be replicated in other operators. The mission had demonstrated that exceptional individual performance could have strategic impact on military operations. Sarah's teammates, who had initially doubted her capabilities, were now describing her as the most effective sniper they had ever worked with. Jackson, who had openly questioned whether women belonged in special operations, was now telling anyone who would listen that Sarah had saved his life and the lives of his teammates. The respect she had earned through her performance was absolute and unqualified. The intelligence gathered during the mission revealed that The enemy had been planning major attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. Sarah's actions had not only saved the lives of her immediate teammates, but had also disrupted enemy operations that could have resulted in significant casualties among American and Allied forces. The tactical success of one mission had achieved strategic impact that extended far beyond the immediate operational objectives.
As Sarah cleaned her weapon and prepared for the long journey back to the forward operating base, she reflected on how far she had come from the small town in Oregon where her grandfather had first taught her to shoot. She had proven that skill, determination, and courage were not limited by physical size or gender. Most importantly, she had demonstrated that being underestimated could be transformed into a tactical advantage when combined with exceptional preparation and unwavering commitment to excellence. The 5 minutes that had changed the outcome of the battle had also changed perceptions about what was possible in modern military service.